He still wants to be your sledgehammer. Hey everyone, it's Reed here. I am alone on my own with the kids on a Saturday while the wife is out, and it's super rainy outside. So I figured I'd probably spend some time today doing something, making a video. There's a new Peter Gabriel album, an I.O. he calls it, and it's really interesting. So I thought I'd listen to it and not do a review. I didn't want to review it. I'm not musically gifted enough to have any authority on, especially someone like Peter Gabriel. But I thought, because it was released in 3 different mixes, unique mixes, I would give you guys some impressions on what those mixes are like, and especially the Atmos one, what that might sound like in your home theater with surround sound, with spatial audio. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to the albums and let you know what differentiates them, why you might want to listen to them, what you might want to listen for on the albums, and kind of where spatial is going and what kind of benefits that the spatial mix might have over the stereo ones. So let's try that out. All right, so I just listened to the opening track on I.O. by Peter Gabriel. It's called Panopticon. I don't know if you know the idea behind Panopticon, but it's a surveillance state. If you're always being watched, people behave differently. It's a fun little psychological thing that's impacting our society. Politics and the purpose behind the song aside, really interesting mix. The original mix, the first mix, is called the light side mix, and I found that it was quite airy. There were effects on my system in pure stereo, kind of going to the left and the right, and pulling me into it, but it did feel like a lighter song. And then the stereo dark side mix was a little bit crunchier, a little bit heavier, as you can imagine, a little bit more focused in on the center in terms of where the instruments and the vocals were, although Peter was still quite present. He cut through, so very well mixed version, and then sprinkled in, and I think it was a little bit more effective, were some effects that went out to the left and the right. But the real magic was as soon as it was in the spatial, the Atmos mix. It definitely sounds like the inside mix that they call it for the Atmos mix was much closer to the dark side mix, and immediately you just felt sucked into it. You were in the middle of the song. I've listened to a lot of spatial mixes, a lot of Atmos mixes, and this was just so good. It was subtle. It wasn't effects-y. That's where an artist will use a bunch of effects. Oh, the drums are spinning around your head, and it's nauseating and detracts, takes you out of the moment. This really puts you into it. Lots of subtle reverb effects and whatnot. And this is just the first song. And another big impact that I saw on the spatial mix is I don't have what's called dynamic EQ turned on my receiver, which generally bumps up the bass. But what I found is in the Atmos mix, and I've seen this in a bunch of other Atmos mixes, the bass is just much more prevalent. Reason behind this is because a spatial mix kind of has 3 separate components. It's got the channel mix, so you can actually mix your music to specific channels for the songs. It's got an object mix, so it's got objects that move around that are rendered in real time and added into your space. And then there's an LFE, which you could kind of say is part of the layers, the channel mix. But what it means when you're listening to the music is the bass is just a lot more prevalent. It's a lot more secured and effective. I found myself hearing the bass drum, the bass guitar much more obviously, and not detracting. It's not boomy or trying to fight for space in the mix. It's just there, and it works. It works really well. So that was the first one. I'm going to sample a few other ones. I'm not going to sample all of the albums because each of them is about an hour, so it'll be just 3 hours of listening. I think I'll pick a few more distinct ones on each of the mixes and go through listening to all 3 and comparing again. Hopefully that is fun for you to get my insights on. One other thing I wanted to mention, I tested it out to see what it sounded like. And I don't know why, and some people do this in their mixes and others don't, but Peter's vocals are actually coming out of the stereo left and right in the Atmos mix instead of the center channel. It sounds fine, but it sounds a little weird. The center channel in a lot of surround sound mixes is where all dialogue comes from. Most people in their home theaters have a pretty decent one so that they can hear that dialogue and in music voices quite well. So hit or miss. It still sounds good. I can't complain too much. It just is, they've chosen to do it out of the left and right speakers instead of the center ones. I'll see if that shows up in the other mixes as well, but I have a feeling that was a choice that they made, and we'll see it in all of them. The next one is called Playing for Time. This one's a really interesting one because it immediately makes me think of Randy Newman from Toy Story. It's got that timbre, and it's a little bit down tempo as well, which I'm not used to from Peter Gabriel, but it's actually a really cool song. So the Bright Side mix is even down tempo. It's a little bit nostalgic, you would say, and has a great feel to it. Whereas I think the Dark Side mix is a little bit more melancholic. So both kind of tug on the heartstrings, and it's got a great feel to it. In the Dark Side mix, I found that the piano and the bass guitar really are more prominent. There's a strong orchestral element to it, but that's much more prevalent in the Bright Side mix. And what's really interesting I'm noticing as I'm listening to these comparative mixes is the spatial one, the inside mix, is actually leaning towards the Dark Side mix, but at the same time it's got its own feel. And the way that it wraps around you with the spatial, with bringing a depth to the song, really gives its own flavor. So the Playing for Time song is actually really interesting, and it feels like a real departure from his usual stuff. I really like it. All right, the last one I wanted to talk about is Road to Joy. This is actually one of my favorite ones on the album, and is really what I feel like is a throwback to his old style, his roots. It's it's quite similar to songs like Sledgehammer and his classics. It's got a really funky beat to it. And what I found is that, all three of the mixes were quite good for it. For the Bright Side one, I felt there was something a little busy in the mix. Maybe they were just trying to fit too much in. There's an orchestral element that kind of weaves in and out, but I find it just is fighting for space within the mix, and kind of just tracks from it. There's a really strong, funky vibe to the whole song, and it just kind of takes you out of that. This song could probably use to be simplified and made, not that I'm, a musician of any caliber like Peter Gabriel, but it just felt busy and a little heavy because of that. And the Dark Side mix was quite good. It simplified quite a bit, and actually I thought was probably the strongest of the three mixes. And then the Inside mix just put together all of that messiness that was in the Bright Side mix, kind of got to be expanded. So even though it was still a little busy around the edges, it could fill the space. The instruments could be separated, the vocals and the effects. So all in all, I think the Dark Side mix was the best of them. I kind of wish that the Inside mix, the spatial one, had more of that simplicity of the Dark Side mix. But all in all, that's probably my favorite one. It has kind of a poppier vibe to it, too, funky and poppy. And I think that if it was to get a single, this would be the single on it. All right, so that is Peter Gabriel's I.O. album. A few other standout tracks. I really liked The Court. All three of the mixes were quite good. Really, all three of the albums, they're very similar. There's a bit of a nuance. For one, they were very consistent with themselves. So if you listen to one all the way through, you would, and if you listen to them separately, you'd probably be able to tell which one is within which album set, which mix set. They were all really good. I love all three albums. My preference is really the spatial one. I think it just works in the space. It didn't rely too much on effects. It immersed you, but kept you interested with the placement of all the instruments and whatnot, while still, holding true to the idea of the song and the overall album. And in general, this was a really interesting experiment. I love that I got to do an impression of it, because how often do you get to see 3 different mixes of the exact same album from an artist as popular as Peter Gabriel? What I would love to see is just more people do that, is expose what they're doing, have different versions out. I know Taylor Swift is doing some stuff with that where she's re-recording. It's very similar to the original version, though. This is interesting that you get to see the reinterpretation at every step. I've heard when I was reading up on this that 9 different studios were involved in the mixing of this. And I can't imagine just how much back and forth and how much interpretation each one had. Must have been crazy making over the 20-year lifespan of this album for Peter Gabriel to take what was originally his artistic vision and then see it through all of these different lenses as different mixers mixed it. So great experiment. If there's interest enough, I'd love to cover some of the other ones. If anyone has other albums that, especially ones that have spatial mixes, I really love those. I love comparing as well the spatial with the old stereo mix, or sometimes they're released at the same time. So leave comments below if you want me to cover any other ones. Hope you enjoyed it and enjoy listening. Thanks. You've got a friend in me.